8 months ago, she fired him in 30 seconds flat. The moment he stood up from a boardroom table on Bay Street and said his daughter was in the emergency room. Today, Claudia Prentiss is the one with nothing. Her firm dissolved by a court order, her accounts frozen by the OSC, her name scrubbed from the glass door of the office. She built over 13 years of 70-hour weeks. And the only person in the entire city of Toronto who has offered her anything at all is the single father she dismissed without blinking. The cardboard boxes the building management left outside her office door were the generic brown kind, the ones that smelled faintly of a warehouse somewhere. Dusty and impersonal and completely indifferent to what they were being asked to hold. Claudia taped the bottom of the first one with the dispenser she found on her assistant's empty desk. The sound of the tape ripping off the roll was obscenely loud in the silence of the 43rd floor. Everyone else had already been escorted out. She had asked for 30 minutes alone. Somehow they had given it to her. She stood in the middle of her office and looked at it properly for the first time in years. The view faced west, toward the lake, and on a clear day in October you could see the water turn that particular shade of slate gray that made the whole city look like it was holding its breath before winter. She had stopped actually looking at it sometime around her 5th year. It became wallpaper, background, something clients noticed, not her. She took her degrees off the wall and left them. Too heavy. She took a small photo from the corner of her desk, her and her sister at a lake in Muskoka, both of them sunburned and laughing, neither of them yet knowing what Claudia's life was going to look like. She tucked it carefully into the box. Then she took the stapler her assistant always borrowed and never quite returned. She didn't know why. She just put it in the box. The insolvency proceedings had concluded that morning in a courtroom on University Avenue. There had been no drama, no raised voices. Just a judge with reading glasses pushed to the end of his nose, a stack of documents, and a tone of voice that sounded like someone reading out a grocery list. Prentiss Capital Advisors dissolved, assets to be liquidated, personal accounts under review, pending OSC investigation. 14 years, dissolved. The word kept surfacing like something unpleasant floating up through cold water. Her board had moved against her 6 weeks ago. Not because the firm was failing, but because it was failing in a way that made their own positions precarious. And precarious was something her board of directors was constitutionally incapable of tolerating. They had accepted an acquisition offer from Devereux Holdings, and they had done it quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, while Claudia was in Vancouver at a client presentation. She had learned about it from a news alert on her phone, standing in a hotel corridor with her presentation binder still tucked under her arm. She finished packing in 17 minutes, one medium box, 13 years of her life, and she could carry it in both arms. The security guard in the lobby, a young man named Terrence, whose name she knew only because it was embroidered on his jacket, held the front door open for her without being asked. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. The October air outside was cold and bright and smelled of exhaust and fallen leaves, the particular smell of Toronto in autumn, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not entirely certain which direction she was supposed to walk. She walked north, then west. Then she hailed a cab because her legs didn't seem to know what else to do. The motel was in Etobicoke, not far from the highway, the kind of place with a sign that had 2 letters burnt out and a parking lot that smelled of motor oil regardless of the weather. It was $89 a night. Claudia had paid 3 nights in advance with the last of the cash she'd pulled from an ATM before the freeze went through. The room had a window that faced a concrete wall and a radiator that made a clanking sound at irregular intervals, like someone knocking on a pipe from very far away. The bedspread was that particular shade of faded burgundy that exists only in motels and old church basements. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her laptop, the personal one the lawyers had confirmed she was permitted to keep, and refreshed her banking portal. Available balance, lawns. She refreshed it again. The number did not change. She closed the laptop. Hunger is an oddly clarifying thing. It cuts through shock and grief and pride with an efficiency that nothing else manages. She hadn't eaten since the day before. She put on her coat and walked 3 blocks to a Tim Hortons because it was the only thing open at that hour, and because, she reasoned, she had no other options. She ordered a medium coffee and a breakfast sandwich and sat in the back corner. The restaurant was mostly empty. A man with an overnight bag was reading something on his phone near the window. 2 teenagers were sharing earbuds at a table near the front. Then she saw them. Across the aisle, a father and a small girl were sitting together over a hot chocolate and a muffin. The girl was maybe 7, her hair in 2 uneven braids that looked like she'd done them herself or let someone who loved her very much but had no talent for braiding do them for her. She was showing her father something on a small piece of paper, a drawing by the look of it, and he was leaning in with his whole body, both elbows on the table, glasses pushed up into his hair, fully present in a way that adults rarely ever were. Claudia looked away. The memory arrived without her permission, the way they always do. The boardroom had smelled of new carpet and the particular aggressive citrus of the cleaning solution the building staff used on the glass table. It was a Thursday in February, and outside the windows the snow was coming down in that flat, determined way that means it's going to keep going for a while. Claudia had been walking the length of the table, reviewing Q3 projections with her risk team, and she was not in a good mood. The numbers were soft in 2 sectors, and she had questions that weren't getting answered quickly enough. Hamish Tully had been sitting toward the middle of the table. He was a senior risk analyst, quiet in meetings unless he had something specific to say, and when he said it, it was usually worth hearing. He wasn't flashy. He dressed like a man who bought his suits when they went on sale and got his hair cut by whoever was available. But his models were consistently the cleanest in the department, and twice in the past year he had flagged exposure that everyone else had missed. His phone was face up on the table. She had noticed it when she walked past. It was a rule in her boardroom that phones stayed in pockets or bags, face down if they had to be out at all, but she hadn't said anything yet. Then the phone lit up. Then it vibrated. Then, in the silence of the room, it rang. Every head turned. Claudia stopped walking. Hamish looked at the screen and something happened to his face. The color drained out of it very quickly, like water going out of a sink. He stood up, his chair scraped back loudly. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was not quite steady. "It's the school. My daughter, she has a severe peanut allergy. If they're calling, it means..." He was already halfway around the table. "I have to go. I have to go right now." "Tully." Claudia said his name, and it landed like a door closing. "We are in the middle of the quarterly review." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll send you everything tonight. If you leave this room right now," she said, keeping her voice completely level, "don't bother coming back." He looked at her. Just for one moment, standing at the end of the table with his coat half on and his phone still lit in his hand, he looked at her with an expression she had never quite been able to name since. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disbelief. It was something quieter and more final than either of those things. Then he left. She had nodded to her HR director before the door was fully closed, processed the termination, job abandonment, and then she had gone back to the numbers, because the numbers were what mattered, and because she had not, at that moment, felt a single thing about it. Sitting in the Tim Hortons now, watching her coffee go cold, Claudia felt it. She felt all of it. The smallness of what she had done, the arithmetic of it. A man's livelihood weighed against a quarterly review she barely remembered now, a child's life in the balance, and she had said the numbers mattered more. She paid for her coffee and her sandwich in exact change, counting it out of her wallet on the table, and walked back to the motel in the dark. She did not sleep. The thing about hitting the absolute bottom is that there is a certain strange silence there. All the noise, the ambition, the strategy, the constant forward motion of planning and defending and acquiring, all of it stops. And in the silence, you can finally hear yourself think, though what you think is not always something you want to hear. Claudia sat on the floor of her motel room at 2 in the morning, with her back against the bed frame and her laptop balanced on her knees. She wasn't ready to give up. She had been for about 40 minutes around midnight in the dark, a kind of quiet, frightening stillness she had never experienced before. But it had passed. What replaced it was something colder and more familiar. The same feeling she'd had at 26. 26, starting out with nothing, when everyone told her the industry didn't work the way she thought it did. She wasn't done. She just didn't know yet what she was going to do. She walked out to get air. The streets at that hour were nearly empty. The financial district a few blocks away was all dark glass and yellow streetlights, the towers looming against the low orange glow of the city sky. She found a bench in a small plaza near King Street and sat down. The cold from the concrete went through her coat almost immediately. Footsteps. She didn't look up. I heard what happened. The voice was familiar in the way that certain things are familiar before you've had time to place them, like a melody from long ago that you know but can't yet name. She turned. Hamish Tully was standing about 2 meters away with his hands in the pockets of a heavy work jacket, the kind with a flannel lining that you buy at Canadian Tire and wear until it falls apart. He wasn't dressed for the financial district. He looked like someone who had just finished a long day and happened to be passing through. Claudia's entire body went rigid, every instinct she had, and most of them were survival instincts dressed up as professional ones, told her to say something sharp and dismissive and walk away before the conversation could start. Tully, she said. Her voice came out colder than she intended, or maybe exactly as cold as she intended. She wasn't sure anymore. Come to watch the city repossess the furniture. He didn't flinch. He didn't look smug. He just looked at her the way someone looks at a person they've been thinking about for a long time, steady and serious, without cruelty. Mind if I sit? Public bench. He sat down on the far end of it. He left plenty of space between them. For a while, neither of them said anything. A streetcar went past on King, its windows yellow and nearly empty, swaying slightly on the tracks. Ava's doing well, Hamish said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the street. She's in grade 2 now. EpiPen in her backpack. School has a protocol. A pause. She's doing well. The name landed somewhere below Claudia's sternum. I didn't ask. I know you didn't. He said it without accusation, as a simple fact. I'm telling you anyway. Claudia looked at her hands in her lap. They were cold, the knuckles whitening in the night air. I don't have anything left for a lawsuit. If that's not why I'm here. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing it against his knee, and then leaned forward and set it on the bench between them. It was a check, a personal check from a credit union she recognized as one of the smaller private institutions on the west end of the city. His signature was on the bottom in blue ink. The payee line was blank. The amount field was blank. Claudia stared at it. I don't understand what this is, she said. Her voice did something she hadn't given it permission to do. Yes, you do. She let out a short, sharp sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You want me to believe that the analyst I fired 8 months ago is sitting on this bench at 2 in the morning offering me a blank check. Why would you do that? What possible reason? Hamish turned to look at her. He wasn't performing patience. He actually seemed patient, the way people are patient when they have genuinely thought something through and arrived at a decision they're at peace with. After you let me go, he said, I had 6 weeks with nothing. I filed for EI, I took every contract I could find, and I used the time I'd spent 4 years watching your firm's risk models to go out on my own. He paused. I started a small advisory practice, nothing like Prentiss Capital. Just me and 2 junior analysts in a shared space in Liberty Village. But I spotted the same structural fragility in 3 mid-cap companies that your board was trying to paper over in your own portfolio. I shorted them. And they collapsed, exactly where I said they would. He looked back at the street. It was enough to keep going, and then enough to grow, and then enough to actually build something. A pause. That check clears. Claudia looked at the slip of paper on the cold concrete between them. Its edge lifted slightly in the wind. "You had every reason to let me drown," she said. "I know. I told you not to come back, your daughter." Her voice broke very slightly on the word. Just slightly. "You called from the hospital. I know what happened." "Then why?" Hamish was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even and unhurried. "Because I remember what it felt like to be sitting in an ER waiting room with my daughter on a stretcher, knowing I didn't have a job anymore, knowing I had rent due in 9 days and no idea how I was going to manage it, and feeling completely powerless." He looked at her. "And I decided then that when I had the ability to make a choice like this, I was going to make the right one. Not for you. For me. Because that's the kind of person I want to be when Ava grows up and starts watching how I handle things." The wind rattled something metallic somewhere down the street. "Fill it in," Hamish said, standing. "Not a fortune. Just enough to get on your feet. A lawyer, a place to stay, whatever comes first." He pulled his collar up against the cold. "And then build something without the rot baked in this time." He walked away. His footsteps faded quickly on the pavement, and then she was alone again, with a blank check and a long, cold night ahead of her. She held it for 4 hours. She sat on that bench until her hands went completely numb, and turned the check over in her fingers, and thought about every number she could write on it. She thought about what it would feel like to write $500,000 and hire the best litigation team in the city and dismantle the Devereaux acquisition from the inside out. She thought about her condo on St. Clair, about the furniture and the art that was going to be auctioned off at 10 cents on the dollar by people who didn't know what any of it meant. And then she thought about Hamish Tully sitting in an emergency room with 9 days until rent was due. She wrote $12,000. She wrote it at a branch on King Street when it opened at 9, standing at the counter with a borrowed pen. The teller verified the funds twice and then pushed $1,200 in cash under the partition without any particular comment. It was enough. It was exactly enough to rent a furnished room in a house near Parkdale. An older house, run by a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Diallo, who asked no questions and made coffee every morning that smelled like the rest of the day might be manageable. It was enough for a laptop, a prepaid phone, and 3 weeks of groceries. It was not enough to do what Claudia needed to do, but it was enough to start. She already knew where to look. She had spent 13 years inside the same ecosystem as Jeffrey Devereaux, had watched the way he structured acquisitions, the way he layered his holding companies like geological strata, each one looking believably legitimate until you got deep enough to find the pressure fault underneath. What she had not known until she started pulling OSC public filings at midnight in Mrs. Diallo's kitchen with the kettle running for the 3rd time was how badly overextended Devereaux Holdings actually was. The acquisition of Prentiss Capital had not been opportunism. It had been desperation. Devereaux had a commercial real estate portfolio bleeding badly from 3 underperforming assets in Calgary and Edmonton, and he had needed Claudia's algorithmic trading platform, which she had built from scratch over 7 years, and which her original incorporation documents made very clear was her personal intellectual property, to shore up the hole in his balance sheet. He had moved it. He had transferred the platform IP to a subsidiary holding company 2 weeks after the acquisition closed, using a mechanism that was creative in ways that the OSC's current enforcement guidelines had not yet caught up to, but not creative enough. On the 4th night, drinking tea she no longer tasted, Claudia found the signature. A digital authorization on a cross-border IP transfer bearing Jeffrey Devereaux's own credentials, time-stamped 6 minutes after the acquisition had been ratified. He hadn't even waited until morning. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark kitchen and listened to the radiator and the distant sound of a streetcar on Roncesvalles. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a person who has found exactly the thing they were looking for and knows precisely what they are going to do with it. The lobby of Devereux Holdings on Adelaide Street smelled of espresso and and the specific kind of expensive quiet that money buys when it wants to be taken seriously. Claudia wore a dark blazer she had found at a consignment shop on Queen West and had a dry cleaner in Parkdale Press until it looked nearly new. She carried a manila envelope. Geoffrey Devereux was not expecting her. The reception staff tried to stop her twice. She told them she had 3 minutes of his time and that it would save him considerably more than 3 minutes of someone else's later, and she said it quietly enough and with sufficient certainty that they called up to his office. He came down himself. She noted that. It meant he was already nervous. He was a tall man in his late 50s, the kind of silver-haired polish that reads as authority until you look closely and notice how tightly his jaw was set. He smiled at her with his mouth only. "Claudia, this is unexpected." "I need 4 minutes," she said, alone. They used a small meeting room off the lobby. He didn't sit. "I want my trading platform," Claudia said. "The full IP, every line of code, all derivative developments, transferred to a holding company of my choice within 10 business days. Those assets are—" "I know where they are," she said. "I know how they were moved. I know whose credentials authorized the transfer and what time it happened and why that distinction matters under the current enforcement framework." She placed the envelope on the table between them. "The OSC's Technology Fraud Division has a new enforcement lead as of this spring. She is very interested in novel IP reclassification mechanisms." A pause. "She will be even more interested in this." Devereux looked at the envelope. He did not touch it. "You have no standing," he said. "You're insolvent." "The IP predates the insolvency. The original incorporation is very clear on that point. I have the filing, and I have the transfer record, and I have a securities lawyer working on contingency because he found the gap in your structure as interesting as I did." She tilted her head slightly. "You absorbed my company to cover your Calgary exposure. Without the platform, your Q1 reporting has a hole you cannot fill from existing assets. I know that because I spent 4 nights in a kitchen in Parkdale reading your public filings." The silence in the room had a particular quality to it. "What exactly do you want?" Devereux said. His voice was quieter now. "What I said, the platform, the IP, a clean transfer and a full release of my non-compete." She picked up her envelope. "In exchange, what's in here stays between us. Your Calgary problem remains your Calgary problem." He looked at the table for a long moment. "You'll have the paperwork," he said finally. "My counsel will contact yours by end of week." "By Wednesday," Claudia said. "I'll see myself out." Liberty Village in November smelled of roasting coffee from the cafe on the ground floor of the shared office building and cold concrete from the construction site 1 block over. The sign on the 3rd floor read Tully Risk Advisory in clean, simple letters on frosted glass. Not large, but solid. Claudia pushed the door open. The front desk was empty. She could hear the hum of servers from somewhere in the back and the sound of a printer finishing a job. Then Hamish came out of the side office carrying a stack of printed reports and stopped. He didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at her. She was not the woman who had sat on that bench 3 weeks ago. She had eaten. She had slept. She had found her footing. She looked like herself again, or close enough to it. "I came to return something," she said. She walked to the desk and set down a certified check. $13,200. The principal plus interest at a standard short-term mezzanine rate. I rounded up. Hamish set his papers down and looked at the check, then at her. "You took 12, he said. "I know what I took." He picked up the check slowly and folded it, and something in the simple deliberateness of the gesture made Claudia look away for a moment. She looked at the frosted glass of the door, at the clean, modest lettering of his firm's name. "I got the platform back," she said. "I'm setting up a new firm. Small, just me for now, and a junior I'm pulling from a university program. No board. Nothing that can be voted out from under me." She paused. "It's clean." "Good," Hamish said. The word fell into the room simply. No flourish to it. Claudia rubbed the sleeve of her blazer. The consignment shop fabric was slightly rough at the cuff. She hadn't replaced it yet. I was wrong, she said. About the metrics inside my old firm. I was so deep inside the growth model I couldn't see how hollow the foundation had become. She stopped. She made herself continue. And I was wrong about what happened in February, in the boardroom, with Ava. The name cost her something to say out loud, and she let it cost her. You were not the problem in that room, I was. The closest she had ever come to an apology. It sat in the air between them, not quite enough, and she knew it, and she said it anyway, because some things need to be said even when they aren't enough. Hamish was quiet for a moment. He nodded once. Apology accepted, he said. He said it without theater, without the warmth of formal absolution or the coolness of residual bitterness. He said it the way two people say something true to each other when they have both survived something and are both still standing. Then, from the back of the office, a door opened. Small footsteps. A girl came around the corner of the reception desk in a purple winter coat that was slightly too big for her, the hood still up, a backpack over both shoulders. Dad, Miss Lefevre said I could leave early because the gym is closed for. She stopped, noticing Claudia. Ava, Hamish said, say hello. The girl looked at Claudia with the complete unself-conscious appraisal of a 7-year-old. Hello, she said. Hello, Claudia said. Her voice came out different than usual, softer. She looked at the girl, the uneven braids, the too big coat, the total self-possession of a child who had learned early that the world required a certain steadiness from her. A child who had been in a hospital bed 8 months ago while her father stood at the end of a boardroom table being told not to come back. She was fine. She was completely, vividly fine, standing there with her backpack and her purple coat, waiting to see if this stranger was interesting or not. Are you a client? Ava asked. Not yet, Claudia said. Ava considered this with the seriousness of someone evaluating a business proposition. Dad has good rates, she said, and he always calls people back the same day. She delivered this as established fact, then went around to the small chair in the waiting area, dropped her backpack with a decisive thud, and pulled out a library book. Hamish watched this with the quiet, faintly helpless expression of a parent who has long since stopped being surprised by his child's directness. If you ever need a risk assessment on the new firm, he said, turning back to Claudia, we don't take on timelines that run past supper, and we don't work Thursdays after 4. Claudia looked at him for a moment. She had run a 14-year enterprise on the principle that everything personal was a liability. She had built every wall she owned out of professional distance, and the conviction that feeling anything was a structural weakness. She was not sure, standing here now, that she still believed that. I'll keep that in mind, she said. She buttoned her coat, nodded once to both of them, and walked out onto the sidewalk. The November air in Liberty Village smelled of coffee and cold, and the particular electric charge of a city about to tip into winter. She didn't have her condo or her corner office or her board or her Bloomberg terminal or her reputation, not yet, and maybe not ever in exactly the same shape. But she had her platform. She had a furnished room and a functional laptop and a junior analyst starting Monday and a certified check she had written entirely herself. And for the first time in as long as she could honestly remember, every step she took felt like it was going somewhere she had actually chosen to go. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below. Does Claudia deserve the second chance? Does Hamish? We would love to know what you think. And if stories about the grace that finds us when we least deserve it are what you're here for, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Hidden Lady, and we'll see you in the next one.